Good morning. Again, ish. My name is Kevin Miller. I'm a principal program manager in the devices and networking team at Microsoft.
My name is Doron Halan. I'm the principal dev lead for the WDK at Microsoft.
So we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about driver development for Windows 8. And I'm going to set up sections a little bit, and then Doron's going to spend, hopefully, more time than I spend yammering, drilling down, showing you the product, and walking through some things. So before we really get started in that, though, I want to set a little context for how you get to here. For those of you who came to the talk that I did yesterday afternoon, I talked a little bit about the Hardware Developer Center. That's a major investment for us in Windows 8 in making it easy to get what you need when you need it, even if you don't know what you need. So just like starting any new project, a lot of times we end up on Bing or DuckDuckGo or your other favorite search engine looking for, I need to write a driver for Windows. And you end up now at the Hardware Developer Center. It just went live Tuesday night. And it's completely redone to try to put everything that you might need at your fingertips. From the beginning, when it's things like, okay, do I need to write a driver? Or can I use inbox or class library functionality? What tools do I need if I need to write a custom driver? If I need to write a custom driver, what driver model should I use? How do I get the tools and kits that are necessary? How do I think about design? How do I think about certification? How do I learn about certification so I can get some idea how to ensure that my customers are going to have a good experience when they plug their device into it? Now it's back. Then moving on from that starting point to later in the process, now I'm partway along, I need to go back. I need to think about, okay, I want to submit this driver for certification. I want to submit the metadata that I created so that the Metro-style device app that I wrote can find the hardware, so Windows can make the connection between those two. Or just so the picture of my hardware shows up when I look in the device manager. Then later on in the process, I need to get some idea of what my customers are really doing with this product. Some telemetry about how much it was used, how often it failed. All of this stuff you can go back to the Developer Center for, the Hardware Developer Center. And so now, go there. It's a good place. Look at some samples, look at the docs, get grounded. Now, it's time to actually build the driver. So now we're into the Visual Studio land. So the primary takeaway for this talk is that we're making it easier to write drivers and applications and author metadata, everything that you need to do for that lifecycle from one tool. So your day-to-day use of our development tools is not how many times you can Alt-Tab to a different window, to a different tool. But you really have what you need at your fingertips. And that represents a real collaboration between Windows, in the person of the WDK team, and the kernel debugging team, with Visual Studio. It's been the biggest request that we've had for many years in the WDK. Microsoft has this really nice integrated development environment for writing applications. I want to use that same environment to write a driver. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the why of this. Then dig in a little bit on what it's like to start from scratch writing a driver for Windows 8 with Visual Studio, and just as important, or maybe more important for a lot of the people here, how to move from Windows 7 style driver to a Windows 8 driver. I'm going to kick off some of the discussion about quality. One of our big focuses this time is to make it easy for partners to do the right thing for quality, for creating great drivers. And then talk a little bit about what's been our internal focus during Windows 8 on the WDK team, which is let's understand the common tasks that people do all the time, and let's try to make those a lot easier to do. So again, the primary takeaway here, though, is we're actually doing the investment with the Visual Studio team to make a great environment. So, when we wrote down what we're going to do in Windows 8, and Daron and I are still employed because we're going to pull this off. When we wrote down what we're going to do in Windows 8, it was 3 buckets. Developer productivity, so that's taking the most common tools, quality tools, kernel debugging, new projects, project conversion, integrating that into Visual Studio. You can say finally if you want to, but yeah, exactly. We have a sense of humor about that. So then, second major focus, moving quality upstream in the process. Because we understand that if you find a bug when your customer is already ticked and they're on the phone with you, that's a lot more expensive than if you find the bug 5 minutes after the developer created the bug. And so our focus here is to try to make tools that tended to get run late and move them upstream. So, for instance, the device fundamentals tests were part of Logo. They're still part of certification. But we've taken those and integrated them into Visual Studio so you can just go run those tests from inside Visual Studio. It's not the complete set of what certification does. We don't automatically run, multi-machine networking tests. But if you think about the fundamentals test, does my machine handle plug and play properly? Does it do the right thing when the machine goes to sleep or wakes up? That basic stuff is now right there on the developer desktop. So you have a lot better idea going into certification whether you're going to have a good experience. And then enhancements into frameworks. Peter Whelan just did a talk on that a few minutes ago. I know some of you were just camped out and stayed here. But if you think about the frameworks, there's a lot of work on power management and plug and play to move code out of the driver. So you don't have to go, why am I keeping a state machine of the plug and play? Why am I keeping track of the state machine? And then I'll talk more about simplifying tasks. So to recap the Visual Studio thing, Visual Studio 11 is a recommended development environment for building drivers for Windows 8. Let's be super clear. that's what we want. That's what we want you to do. And you'll have a better experience if you do it that way, because there's a lot of stuff in there that lights. There's a lot of functionality in the WDK that lights up on Dev 11. So then, this is a difference. The WDK is no longer a standalone kit. It requires Visual Studio. For those of you who know Visual Studio, it's just another. It's the best, but it's just another Visual Studio add-on. And then finally, the USB stick that you got as part of your conference materials has a copy of Visual Studio Ultimate on it, because you can't build the driver with Express. And Express is preloaded on the machines that you were given, but Ultimate and the WDK are on the stick, so you can install them from the stick. And so the leverage here then is Visual Studio at the bottom. That includes a bunch of the Ultimate version includes a bunch of the basic SDK functionality. Then what the add-on pack for the WDK does is just layer on the pieces that aren't in Visual Studio. So that's things like the kernel mode headers and libs, the driver-specific tools, the new templates. But again, we're moving away from a standalone to a layer cake model. So when you no longer have multiple compilers on your machine. If you installed, in the past, if you installed Visual Studio and the SDK and the WDK, you could end up with up to 3 different compilers. And that was a frustration that I know many of you had. So now it's all the Visual Studio compiler. We build Windows with the same compiler. It's the promised land we all wanted. And then we're moving some of the functionality that should obviously be online. And hopefully the theme that's coming through here is that we're trying to treat driver development just like any other kind of development. If you want the docs, they're on MSDN. If you want the samples, they're on the sample gallery. The first 35 or 36 samples are live on there now, and you can get to those from the Hardware Developer Center. Teeing up the first demo from Daron then. There's 2 things about the get going here. The first is we have a bunch of templates for common drivers. So in Visual Studio, just like any other development, you can go File, New, Project, and you can say, I want to write an Indus driver, and you'll get a skeleton driver that has the right entry points in it that will build, that you can deploy and debug right out of the box. And there's a conversion tool that automatically takes your Win7 project and converts it to a Win8 project. And as I mentioned before, and as those of you who saw Peter's know, there's a bunch of work in the frameworks to allow you to leverage our work and write less code yourselves. So the first step then.
So the first demo is going to be creating a new project in Visual Studio Ultimate. So this is what's included on your USB key. So all you to create a new project is File, New, Project. And I'm going to turn on Magnifier because it tends to be a little bit easier to read. And you can see under here, under Windows Driver, we have a bunch of categories. If I click Driver, I get, one second, let me zoom out. If I click on Driver, there's the entire list, and then we've subcategorized them by type. I'm just going to pick a WDF driver, KMDF, we can get out of Magnifier now. So it created the project. I have a fully functioning stub KMDF driver, loads, creates a device, creates a queue, doesn't define any ioctls or anything like that, but it goes off, and you can then use it as a starting point. So first things first, I can build it. Always joyful. And one of the interesting things here, and I'm going to show this on the command line as well, is that not only did we build it, we created a driver package for it and signed it. So there's a compilation here. Creating the signature. And what happens here is if this is the first time you've ever run Visual Studio and ever attempted to sign for it, we'll automatically create a cert for you and sign it for that. And then when we go to deploy it to the other machine, we'll automatically take your cert, deploy it to the remote machine, add it to the cert store there, and then if it's an x64 machine, turn on test signing. So all the hoops that you have to go through to sign, seal, and deliver a package onto a remote machine to start testing is taken care of for you in one button press. So what we have here is I built for Windows 7. We have, just like in the old kit, you can target multiple operating systems. So we can target Windows 8, same thing, F7 rebuilds. And then show it from the command line. So it was clear that it's important to you that you can build from the command line, that you can have build servers, you can automate your builds, and that you can have full fidelity in terms of what you were able to do with the Windows 7 kit in terms of scripting and being able to produce something in an unattended fashion. Yeah, so we can do that. Is that big enough? MS build. You have to get used to the new syntax. So /t is a target, which means that's in make world, that's something to the left of a colon. So clean out the current directory. I then want you to build. I want my configuration to be Windows 7 debug. And away we go. And this is exactly the same as what you see in the IDE. There is no difference at all. It's all the same underlying core engine, which means that you have repeatable builds in both the command line and in the UI. If you're familiar with the Windows 7 kit, if I wanted to build for x64, I had to open up another window. Not anymore. So I just built an x64 version of the same driver in the same command window. If I wanted to build it for Vista x64, I just did it there. So you have full flexibility now in terms of being able to build whatever you want from the same window without alt-tabbing or without flipping back and forth between a bunch of different configurations and kind of a nightmare. So it took us a long time to get to this point, and we're really happy to get there, and we really want to hear your feedback in terms of where you want to see improved and what you'd like to see us do further.
Okay, he'll come right back. He'll just write another demo while I talk about what he's going to have to do. It's a good game we play. All right, we're going to talk about driving quality upstream. So start typing. All right, so a common situation is that people write drivers in simple C++, even though technically driver development is really supported in C. And this historically has created some interesting opportunities for building your debugging skills, because it wasn't clear where you stepped off the edge of that cliff. It's like, I can use a little C++, that worked. I can use a little more, that worked, and then all of a sudden your driver doesn't load. And it wasn't clear what you had done, and it was a special experience. So what we're doing now for Windows 8 is we're acknowledging C++ as a first-class citizen for driver development. And so you can say finally again if you want to. It's all right. So there's a new compiler switch /kernel that was developed with Daron and some of the guys in the C++ team. And what it does is it looks for the exact sorts of C++ uses that you can't do when you're writing a kernel mode driver. And so you catch things. Again, this is all part of that moving the good stuff upstream, moving quality upstream. Now you catch that problem when you try to compile, not later on when you're going, my driver doesn't load, and I have no idea why. And there's some other switches too, but /kernel is the big one. And there's a follow-up talk by Jakob and Karam, who are here somewhere. Raise your hands. They gave up their seats. Okay. So they're going to do a drill down on the quality tools and testing, which would be a great follow-on session for you guys. But they're going to talk in some detail about static driver verifier being integrated into Visual Studio. So now in the driver menu, there's you can, from right inside the driver menu, run static driver verifier. You can run code analysis, which is really the continuing evolution of the artist formerly known as PFD. So again, this is all part of this effort to take the most important quality tools and integrate those into the environment, and to recognize, in the case of C++, what real use is, and try to make it easier and more supportable. All right, so demo 2. Give me a second.
All right, so the first thing I'm going to show is some of the uses of the /kernel flag. And by doing, I'm going to add a C++ file. It's something I pre-wrote to demonstrate some of the new syntax and features that we added. Apparently Visual Studio thinks it knows where to put my file. There we go. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So what I've created here is a simple class hierarchy, a class that derives from it. And the first thing you notice here is that I can now declare the code segments for individual member functions within a class. You don't have to start wrapping with begin seg, end seg. You can tag each individual function in their own segment, which means that you have more maintainable code. When I was attempting to write C++ kernel mode code in the past, I always I would have blocks of pageable, non-pageable code. I always ended up putting code in the wrong section and screwing things up. So this gives you very clear, explicit control over where things go. So we'll just do a test build, make sure it builds. Okay, it's up to date. So one of the things that we want to do with /kernel was prevent you from even attempting to use the C++ features that we don't support in the kernel. So we're not supporting runtime type identification. We're not supporting C++ exceptions. It's only native exception handling. So this is a demonstration of when I build and I attempt to use dynamic cast. We can see here at the bottom, I'll zoom in on that because there's no way for me to make that bigger, is the dynamic form of dynamic cast is not supported with /kernel. So by default, every single kernel mode project that you create in Visual Studio adds /kernel to both the compiler and linker command lines. For the linker, it does some safer things in terms of section folding, inlining, and a bunch of optimizations. It makes it more page, non-page code aware, essentially. So the next thing I wanted to show was just a little bit more in-depth versions of these classes where not only can you start tagging functions themselves, you can start tagging classes themselves. You can partially specialize templates. So you could have the same template instantiation of one type that has a ulong that's paged, and the other type where the specialization is ulong that's non-paged, and they're treated as separate, distinct types. So you no longer have a cold folding problem either. So you can see here I have a root. The rules are if you're going to start doing virtualization, virtual methods, that everything that derives from the root also has to be in the same section. And so here's just a simple test that demonstrates that example class here must have the same code seg as root. So we have foo and bar. We fix that. We come back down. And we should be good to go. No? Yes. Now, for instance, if I did something like this, the compiler is pretty picky about all the different rules. And we come back here, and so now we have the detour has to match, because it's in the vtable, has to match the current, the base class's code segment. So the next thing I'd like to show is the integration of prefast. So what I'm going to do is introduce a silly bug. And what I'm going to do is raise Urkel before I create the WF driver object. So first here you can also see IntelliSense. Clearly it's tiny, and I can't zoom in because as soon as I lose focus, but you get that, which means that I can, it also shows you the warts key. Raise Urkel is actually a pound defined to something else. But I can auto tab. Let's make sure that it builds. Let's get rid of example. All right, so build succeeded. Now what I'm going to do is go run analyze and run code analysis solution. Let me just make that a little bit bigger so everybody can see that. It's going to run. Just like prefast, it takes a little while for it to run. It's not a super long time, but the engine does need to go. So we see here 2 succeeded. And now on the left, we have our list of issues that the engine found. So first, it's telling me I raised Urkel, but I never restored it. So we now, I can make it bigger. So again, this is driver entry raised Urkel, but didn't restore it. So there was no matching K lower Urkel. I was calling WF driver create at the wrong Urkel. And then this is a bit of a declaration issue. So the takeaway here is that the code that we give you is fully annotated, which allows for static analysis up front, and it's going to be a static analysis clean. And that all our headers are static analysis clean. So when you start going and creating your driver, it really behooves you to start adding annotations quickly, and you can start integrating Prefast, which is also available. You can also run the analysis from the command line as well, just like I ran the compilation as well. It's just additional flag to MS-Build.
Okay, so moving on to the third section, and I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that we focus a lot of effort on looking at common scenarios that we know our partners do every day and trying to make those a lot easier. The guys in our quality team do not particularly like the fact that I refer to these as easily run tests and easily write tests, because there's a whole bunch of interesting technology under both of those. But I get to decide what I call it. But so the idea here is really the scenario. The customer, at some level, the partner doesn't care how much stuff we're doing behind the covers, as long as it works and it makes their life better. And you can also tell that we call it this because no marketing guy would let you come up with an acronym that was pronounced ERT. So the idea here is getting set up to build a driver, package a driver, sign a driver, deploy a driver, run some tests, debug the results. That's a path that developers take multiple times all the time. And historically, a pretty painful path. Some of you know Peter Viscarola. He's one of our partners, does a lot of training, and he spends about 6 hours, I think it is, in a couple of hours of lecture in like a big lab with new driver developers, just getting them over this first hurdle of I can build something, I can set up a test machine, because only the very brave or very crazy, would try to debug on their developer machine, right? So I have to set up a remote machine. I have to build the driver. I have to package it and sign it so I can do something with it. I have to get it over to that machine. I have to have that machine ready to receive it and install it. And then I want to be able to remotely debug it and run some tests on it. And it's really super hard to get it working at all. And it's quite painful even to just keep using it. So for us in Windows 8, this was probably the biggest feature for the WDK team. And again, in that theme, we want driver development to be as much like regular app development as possible. Where we wanted, our goal was to get to where you could hit F5, have the driver build, test signed, pushed over, run some tests on it, debug, kernel debug, all from inside Visual Studio. And so you have, you have the stick that's got this on it, and it works. And there's a hands-on lab where you can go down and you can do it with some, test guys and program managers around to ask questions as you go through. But this this was really a transformational moment for us. Our own internal test team was, pretty excited about this because it makes their lives easier. So I think, you'll find that it makes life easier for developers and quality people at your companies as well. So that's Run, and Run is preloaded, as I said earlier, with the device fundamentals tests from certification. So then, okay, now you might also want to write your own unit tests that you also want to make part of that easy pass for the developers. And so that's easily write tests. And that means writing a new driver test is just like writing anything else in Visual Studio. You go new, project, driver test. And we have some building blocks in there to make it easier to create those tests. But again, it's just like anything else. You build that test, and when you build your own test, it automatically shows up in the drop-down menu to select tests on easily run tests. So build your test. There it is. If you want to distribute it to other people in your group, you just drop that into a well-known location, and it shows up for anybody in the group to run. So again, just a big focus on trying to understand what the common experiences are and make them less painful. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to show you is a project that I set up previously. So what I did is I took the toaster sample.
My bad.
No, it's okay. Nothing really interesting happened. What I did is I had a previously generated solution over here. That is, I took two of the sample projects out of the toaster family of samples. I took enum.exe and dynambus, so the toaster bus sample, put them in their own solution. I just copied them over from the sample tree, put them in the solution, and then deployed it to this machine. I had to deploy it to this machine earlier because of networking issues, so and I used the entire VS workflow to do it. I just did it on a corporate domain where there was authentication, as opposed to now where it doesn't quite work that well for me. So we can see here, and I'll go through the properties, that we have some deployment settings where we can enable deployment. I can tell it to go shove the driver package into the store. I give it a remote machine name. I can tell it to use DevCon, use the hardware ID for you to go install onto. And then if I have additional files outside of what's in my solution, go put these into the driver package. So here I have the Win7WDK, which has the Win9 co-installer. I say, okay, go copy that co-installer over because I'm installing to a Win7 machine. So I'm going to turn that off for a moment. And then also here under debugging, you can see here that the Windows kernel debugger is a new option. And we have settings for my machine over here. I don't want to save any changes. So debug, we're going to do attach to process. So we have here again is the Windows kernel mode debugger. I have my machine. Say I want to debug kernel. And I'm going to attach to it. All right, so here, let's quit out of this for a second, is what would be your previous experience with WinDBG integrated within Visual Studio. So we can break in, you get all your bang commands. So if I want, and dot command, so I want to reload everything. Yeah, we will zoom in. If I wanted the, let's say, information on the driver I have loaded, it all works. Bang dev node. So the next thing I want to demonstrate, let's just get rid of the disassembly, is you can set live breakpoints. So this is the IOCL handler. When you run enum and you say, hey, go plug in a child, this is what gets called. So we can see here that we list the breakpoints, that it automatically gets set by source line resolution. So I hit go. And over here, you have to trust me, all I'm running is enum-p1 to plug it in.
Can you switch it to it?
No, that's fine. And over here, we're broken in. So now I can step. I get IntelliSense, or we have our hover and value. We have locals. So all the pieces that you would you use in normal user mode debugging, you get in Visual Studio using the underlying kernel debugger engine. You get things like you can actually edit in place sometimes. Maybe not at this point. But you can see here it deals with the open-ended array just fine. If you look at the definition of this structure, it's just a bunch of wchars. So this should help you now from the previous stack, create a driver, or previous demo, create the driver, sign it, shove it over this machine, create some tests with what Kevin talked about before, and start debugging immediately. And then I can hit F5, and now the machine is responsive again.
Just so I didn't cough while Daron was talking there, muted. So the kind of release notes detail in this is Visual Studio's on the stick. Please start playing with it. Let us know. There's an email alias coming up in a slide or two that will get mailed to Daron and me and test some of the test guys on our team. Visual Studio has this thing called Go Live licensing, which is in place to address a historical kind of mismatch between I've got a kit, I'm trying to build a driver, my license agreement doesn't exactly let me build a driver yet, but I have to build it now to get it ready for when the operating system ships. So that's being addressed here by this concept of Go Live licensing. There's more detail about that available on the Hardware Developer Center. One of the really common scenarios, and Daron talked about this a little bit when he showed doing everything from the command line that you can do from the UI, is a common request for Visual Studio historically has been, how do I run Visual Studio without in a versioned way or without having to install the whole IDE for instance, on a build server. And so a new work item that the Visual Studio guys are working on now is they're writing a white paper that says here is the supported way to do, in effect, headless Visual Studio. So you can get Visual Studio installed on a build server in a version-controlled way, in a command-line-only way, and you can run everything that way on your build server. And coincidentally, it also enables the scenario where I'm an individual developer. I need to check out last year's build chain to do a fix on an old driver and then go back to the one that I'm currently working on. So the same model allows you to do that. So they're going through and basically telling you how to refactor the installation so you can do version control. And it also allows you to do version control within the IDE. So if you say, we're going to use Visual Studio 11, we want to lock on a particular set of tools, and we want to keep those in place, or be able to, more importantly, be able to revert back to those when I have to do a fix on an old system, that'll be supported.
So one thing also to mention there is that the EULA and licensing will support multiple people using the build server.
Right.
From a licensing perspective, not every single person who runs the build server needs a license.
Operating systems targeted, Win 8, Win 7, Vista. Vista, in this case, includes Server 2008, both SP2 and R2. So the supported systems. So I'm going to summarize. I'm going to leave about 15 or so minutes for Q&A. So think of some really hard ones to ask Daron. A big focus is on developer productivity, right? This is what, when we started talking today, one of the things that we really worked on throughout was to try to make common scenarios easier, to make developers more productive. There's a hands-on lab, number 721. It's called Experiencing Windows Driver Kit Integration with Visual Studio, which is quite a mouthful. But that is the best hands-on lab I have ever worked through. You could say so easy, even a program manager could use it. I would say so easy, even a manager of program managers can use it. Okay, I heard that whistle, by the way. All right, so that's a great hands-on lab. There are people from the test team and the dev team and the program management team all there. So it's a good opportunity to chat up people in the team if you have specific questions, want to follow up. And it covers really everything we talked about today. Building from the command line from the UI, running the quality tools. It's got some canned stuff that has defects that you can find. Packaging, remote deployment, remote debugging. They've got that all set up in there. I highly recommend that. Then, again, a big focus, as you saw, on making it easier to do the right things with quality control early in the process. And there's a session coming up, moving driver quality upstream with WDK driver verification and test tools. Another mouthful. But that's looking at quality all up. That is the I really care about quality talk, which hopefully you all do. And it talks about static driver verifier in some detail, about prefast code analysis, driver verifier a little bit, and then how to think about also the overall strategy for how you think about testing a driver, how to leverage the various tools, how to write your own tests, how to run the easily run tests feature is covered in much more detail in that talk. So that's highly recommended. And then the third one is the Stump the Chumps talk. These chalk talks are generally really light on slides and really big on Q&A. So that's Janet from the dev team and Karam from the test team. They're going to do maybe 10 to 15 minutes of here's how you do it, and then they're going to be wide open for questions. And Peter Whelan's going to be there from the Frameworks team, and I expect Daron will be there. We'll have a bunch of people sitting in the audience. And if you have questions, that's a good place. So to kind of wrap up this and move into the Q&A session, this is all about really doing driver development in Visual Studio and doing it right. And we'd love, love, love for you guys to play around with this, give us feedback, convert Win 7 projects to Win 8, and tell us how it went. We, at this point, have converted everything that we can find, and we have our internal conversion rates up to 100%, but we have definitely not seen the whole world. So convert projects, kick the tires on the thing, give us feedback. This is a great time to give us feedback because it's still early enough that we can do something about it. This slide is really here just so you have it when you look at the conference materials. There are hyperlinks on it. It's the drill down on Visual Studio licensing. As Daron said, Visual Studio is licensed per user, not per instance. So if you're a single developer and you think, I want to set up a 12 virtual machines so I can have down level versions exactly the way I want them, that's fine. You don't have to. That's not a multiple licensing issue. It's it's per user. So there's a lot of information. In general, Visual Studio has lots of programs that allow you to get Visual Studio and other Microsoft products at a discount. Everything from targeted to college students through small businesses and medium-sized businesses all the way to enterprises. So if you look at the Visual Studio thing and say, how do I get it? Here's some links that you can look at to find ways. This information will also be available on the Hardware Developer Center. So we're, again, trying to make sure everything that you need to do your job, even to figure out what it is you really need, is available in the Hardware Developer Center. The contact alias win8wdk at microsoft.com. That goes to Daron and me and our test counterpart, who's on paternity leave, so he's probably not going to respond right away. But and also some other people on our team. So that's a good alias. There are links again in the materials to some key documentation on MSDN. You can also get there from the Hardware Developer Center. And then some sessions that are related to this one. Peter's just went before this, but again, probably two that are super important for this audience. The 239 talk, the quality talk that I already talked about, and 98 got renumbered sometime after my slides went final to 118. So 118 is now the kernel debugging talk. That's George Holt from the kernel team and another person from the kernel team, and I'm sorry, from the kernel debugger team. And so they're going to talk in great detail about the scenario that Daron talked about briefly. So if you really want to dig down into that one, that's the place to go for that. All right. Thanks very much. Questions?
If you have questions, please go up to the mic.
Or just call it out and repeat it.
Sure.
Can you import existing Makefile/sources like projects?
So the question is, can you import existing sources and Makefile-based projects? And the answer is yes. There is a tool in the kit called nmake to msbuild, and 2 is the number 2. That's under the tools or conversion bin directory. It's under the root, dir/s. We'll find it for you. And you can run it on an entire tree. So it'll go and traverse the entire tree, run through dirs files, sources files, whatever it finds, and convert and create solutions and projects for you. And that, as people have played with sources files for a long time, NMake is an open-ended world of whatever you can do in there. And we tried our best to be as flexible as possible in the conversion tool. We know that there's deep, dark corners which we haven't seen before and need help. So if you're on the conversion tool and you run into problems, please use the Win8 WK alias. And we'll ask for some logs, and we'll debug it for you over email.
You demonstrated a deployment scenario for a driver which used DevCon to flip a root enumerated device into the target system. What other classes or mechanisms are supported for the deployment from out of Visual Studio? Say, for instance, if you're doing a net service class driver, which would be typical of myself, or a filter driver, something that doesn't necessarily start with a root enumerated or a hardware enumerated device.
So you can, one, it's open-ended. So in the UI, which I didn't go into, there's additional actions, so you can write your own custom script that will go off and go do whatever you want. There is as far as I know, a legacy driver scenario as well, which is essentially the whole net start, net stop thing that should be supported as well. So we didn't just bake it and assume that DevCon was the only way to go about it. We wanted to make sure that it was really a platform for you to build what you needed on top of it, with pre-canned scenarios taken care of for you. And the question was, sorry for not repeating.
Okay.
Do you support all the standard debugging scenarios that the DBG supports, like boot time debugging and trying to attach to a machine that's crashed, or breaking into a machine that's kind of hung or something?
So the question is do we support? Is there full fidelity from WinDBG in the Visual Studio integration? And the answer is yeah. The underlying there's the underlying engine, DBG-Eng, which is WinDBG's just UI on top of. We use the same engine in both. So everything that DBG-Eng can do in WinBag, you can do in VS.
And if you guys include USB debugging?
That's a loaded question. So have we improved USB debugging? So let me answer. So the answer is yes. If you're using USB 3, we worked from the ground up to make sure that there's a USB debugging standard that doesn't need a fat cable. For USB 2, you still need a fat cable. We are working with OEMs to make sure, and they actually, I think, go into, in the debugger team talk, they talk about standardized ports and what we need for certification, where we're trying to make sure that there is a debug port available on new machines, whatever the form factor is.
But the theory is if it's USB 3, you should support any device that's got USB.
Well, we tried to make USB 3 make it mandatory that you support a debug port on an XHCI controller, and that got turned into optional with a highly recommended asterisk. So I think certification will further that asterisk.
And George is going to talk in the debugger talk more about certification requirements for debuggability.
We're trying. We know the pain. We feel the pain because we get these machines and we have to debug them. Yeah.
On the eye?
Do you have a plan to support Express Edition?
I'm sorry.
Studio, Express Edition?
Do we have a plan to support Visual Studio Express? And the answer is no. We're going to be supporting Visual Studio Pro and higher. Express is targeted entirely at writing modern applications and only writing modern applications.
Metro style.
Apps. Metro-style apps.
Program for beginners. I have a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a program for beginners.
Yeah, so the comment is that requiring above Express can be a limitation, especially for people who are starting out. So if you're starting out, so there's a couple of things. One, the Visual Studio Ultimate Edition, Visual Studio does a 90-day trial. So you can download Visual Studio 11, and you have 3 months to figure out if this is for you, if it really works. And if at any point during that 3 months you get a license by one of the programs that I mentioned, then you just type the license in and it activates in place. You don't have to uninstall or anything like that. So I think that addresses, or at least pretty much addresses the I'm a beginner, I want to get started, and I don't want to go shell out for Ultimate before I even understand if I need this or what it means. So.
Yeah.
Since Windows 8 is multi-platform, does all this good debugging stuff work to the ARM from a PC?
Yes. You can debug.
Repeat it.
So the question is can you debug an architecture that is not the architecture which you're running the debugger on is essentially the question you asked. So from my development host machine, you can debug x86, x64, or ARM.
There was one in the back there.
Yeah, basically it was a related question. Whether you provide those ARM tools now on the flash.
The ARM tools are not on the flash. So there's some ARM follow-up discussion, but about all that I can say right now is that they are not currently available, and they're not on that flash drive. Yeah?
Just signing, do you support signing with more than just your test certificate?
Yeah, so the question is, do we support signing with more than just a test certificate? So this goes back to doing the right thing by default. So like I showed, we will create a cert for you and sign with it. There's UI for you to allow you to configure to sign with whatever certificate or PFX file you want. So there's an option there for production signing, and you can sign with whatever you want, however you want.
One more comment on the signing. In the version that you have on the stick, the navigating between test signing and production signing is
Distinct options.
yeah, and it's not super obvious. So that's actually a DCR that we have teed up that the work's being done right now. So it's there, it works. You just might be going, that was not obvious how I get between these two things. So. Another one in the back. Thank you.
Is Windows XP supported?
Question is Windows XP supported, and the answer is the answer is no. The minimum target OS we have is for writing drivers and apps is Vista, and the minimum version for Dev 11 is Windows 7.
When he said minimum version for Dev 11 is Win 7, he meant running on the developer box.
Your
You can target,
your development host.
You can target for Vista. But
Does that minimum version hold true for the build system components as well as
So the question is does that hold true for the build system itself as opposed to the full install? And the answer is yes. MS Build is .NET 4.5 based, and .NET 4.5 runs down to Windows 7. We have a hard time seeing because we have very bright lights. So.
Do you support all these connections like 1394 serial?
So the question is within the Visual Studio UI, do we support all the connectivity that they talked about in terms of debug transports? And the answer is yes. Serial, FireWire, USB, Ethernet are all there. Yes.
yeah, I think I know we've kind of belabored this a little bit, but we really tried to make it so that running from the command line, running from inside Visual Studio, really the same. And the debugger is just another great example of that. That it's the same engine, it's just a different UI presentation of the engine. So. Any others?
Oh, no, yeah.
So all your drivers have to be compiled built to this specific platform. But application, if it's built on top of a WinRT or OpenML, it doesn't compile.
Yeah. So the question is the drivers have to be specifically targeted, but the Metro style applications don't. That's correct. But
a subset of Metro apps. If it's JavaScript or C#, you can run anywhere. If it's a C++ Metro style app, then you're going to have to target each processor, just like you do with any standard C++ compile.
Why? Because they're all used to WinRT.
WinRT is mode agnostic, but it doesn't mean it's processor agnostic in terms of language.
Will the WDK still be supported in normal command line mode where you don't use it with Visual Studio?
So the question is WK supported in full command line mode without Visual Studio? We require Visual Studio components. We require MS Build to be installed by Visual Studio. And then as Kevin talked about, there was going to be a white paper coming out that talks about how to create an environment that just has the necessary pieces to run without the rest of the IDE.
But I think the specific question is, do you have to have Visual Studio?
And the answer right now
and the answer is yes, because you have the compilers from Visual Studio,
Correct.
for instance.
So if we still support XP and Win2K, then we can't switch to the Win8 WDK?
So the question is if you support XP or Windows 2000, can you not switch to the Windows 8 WDK? And the answer is yes. You can't switch. Just like with the Windows 7 WDK, if you support a Windows 2000, you couldn't move to the Windows 7 WDK either. And that had nothing to do with a command line versus UI. It has to do with what we decide to support in terms of the build environment, the underlying build environment infrastructure.
Which is a big component of what we have resources to test, how far back on the island.
Does it mean the build machine has to upgrade to at least Win 7?
Can you repeat your question? Does that mean?
The build machine.
So the question is, does your build machine have to be at least Windows 7? Yes. The answer is yes.
Now on the aisle.
Okay, so I have a number of scenarios that basically involve using WinDebug standalone. Are we going to get that back?
So the question is, do you get WinBag back? And WinBag will always be there because they're
It will always be there.
There are certain server scenarios, and there's usually a bunch of requirements where you have to be completely stateless to the machine, and WinBag is an Xcopy install. So yeah, you'll have WinBag, KD, all those tools are still there.
I mean, I was hoping that we could just get the download link back so I can get the current version off the website.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna so the other question is can I download WinBag without downloading anything else? And we're working on that, and at beta, hopefully at beta, you will have an answer for that.
It looks like the solution will be you'll hit one of the kit installs, and that first little preloader thing, it'll let you uncheck everything else.
Yeah, you'll have a select install.
So, and then you'll just get your exactly. You won't get the 500 meg download just to get an 8 meg debugger.
Is some WPP support or I need to use the bang commands?
So is there WPP support in the bang commands?
No, is the WPP support built into the Visual Studio or I need to use the bang command?
Oh, okay. So is there WPP support built into Visual Studio? At the moment, there is not. I had an intern prototype something, and it's not something that's very difficult to do. But right now, all you do have is the bang commands and the existing tools like TraceView and things like that.
By the door?
When can we start getting official support for Win8? For Win 7, you can file an incident with MSDN. You can get support that way. Is it okay to post questions on OSR Online? Put us in a lot of
So probably the best thing to do
You
for
wanna
right
repeat the
now
question?
is to
Repeat the
use the
question.
Win8. I'm sorry, the question was, what do you do about Win8 support until the official channels start working? So for right now, probably the best thing to do is use that Win8 WDK alias.
Microsoft Monitor.
Well, that goes directly to our team. So we're going to get to the point where the official support channel is up. And I think that's at beta, but I'm not 100% sure that that's the right date. It's definitely not. The support guys are just ramping up on the product right now. So
And if you've participated in NT-Dev, then you clearly know that I answer questions. So I'm out there answering and helping people out. So that's there might not be an official support channel, but there's me.
Oh, and by the way, you can get to Daron's blog from the Hardware Developer Center.
Yeah.
It's kind of stale right now, but you.
That we were hoping to load it up with some content.
Yeah, I'm assuming graphics driver, kernel, and user mode debugging deployment support.
So the question is graphics, kernel mode, and user mode driver deployment is supported. That's not specifically a scenario that we go off and test because usually the graphics team engages in the few vendor drivers that go out there, and most of them are in box, and they have their own processes, but it should be flexible enough. So if you have particular quirks or asks about how that works or what you want to, we can talk about it offline and see if and how much is there. Yes?
Do you have any Visual Studio projects for creating debugger extensions, and can we do that?
So the question is, do we have any pre-canned VSEX proj files for creating debugger extensions? And the answer is no, we don't yet. But that's a good thing to add in. So we'll if you go to
that alias and say, how about one of those?
So the debugger install that's on with the WDK will install the standard debugger extension stuff that you got previously in Win 7. And I don't remember if it's build.exe based, you can convert it, and you'll get a project out of there. In the aisle.
I think I saw the WDK documentation was only going to be available online. Is it already live?
Is the WDK documentation for 1.8 live? Yes.
Let me
A
put a little.
subset.
Yeah, let me put a little asterisk after that. It's going live. Some of it's updated, some of it's not. So as you browse through, you'll have a little continuity break where you go, that's Win 8, and then you'll see the next dock might be a Win 7 dock. So it's in the process of going up. Once it goes online, it will be downloadable to your local machine if you don't want to always do it online. But it is in process. Part of it's updated, part of it's not.
And it's not in the Flash that we look.
No, it's not. There's no documentation on the Flash in terms of like API docs and stuff like that.
So we're out of time, so we'll hang around here and then maybe drift into the hall. So if you have other questions, please come up. Thank you very much.